Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Martha Cole, and I'm with the Montana Historical Society. And before we start, I want to thank our business partners, Opportunity Bank and Valley Bank, as well as our co-sponsors for this program, the Helena Indian Alliance and the Indian Education Unit of the Montana Office of Public Instruction, without whom we could not have been able to put on this program. So thanks to them. It's my honor tonight to introduce our speakers. Donnie Wetzel Jr. is a member of the Amskapi-Piikani Blackfeet Nation and a longtime educator and coach. He's also the director of the Montana Indian Athletic Hall of Fame, which he co-founded with his father, Don Wetzel Sr. And Abe Streep, on his right, is the author of Brothers on Three, a true story of family, resistance, and hope on a reservation in Montana, which won the Montana Book Award and the New Mexico-Arizona General Nonfiction Book Award. He also writes for a number of publications, including The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, the Montana Free Press, and Outside. So please help me welcome Abe and Donnie.
Are these on? These on? Check. Let's do this. Hi everyone. Thanks for having us. I want to thank. Just start by. Thanks to Martha, thanks to the Historical Society, thanks to Benji and Anthony up here who are helping us, and thanks to all of you. And I want to start by thanking Arlee, because the story of the Arlee Warriors is this most amazing team. It's Arlee's team, it's Arlee's story. And I want to thank the people who trusted me and shared their stories with me. So to Arlee, with all my heart, thank you. With that in mind, actually, I'm going to just start by, there's a couple people from Arlee here this evening, so I'd just like to start by inviting them up and recognizing them. Jordan and Logan Leffler are here, who made the films that the Arlee Warriors made that gained so much prominence. Thank you. They are remarkable filmmakers whose work elevated this team's voice. And I want to thank Donnie too, because there is a reality that this book was hard to write, and in addition to helping me figure out and think about a lot of the contextual aspects of the book, which we'll discuss tonight, I think, especially when it comes to recruitment and societal obstacles to recruitment, institutional discrimination. Donnie was instrumental, but also more than that, a source of strength and kind of one of many people who helped me and believed in this project. And it wouldn't happen without that, without you telling me that in many ways I should.
I'll get you that $20 later for saying it. Yeah, I think so. I'm just honored to be able to help with in any way I can in some of the things. And Abe and I have become pretty good friends now, and those lights are really bright, so it's kind of strange. But yeah, so I think there's a lot that you did in the book and representing the people, and I think we'll have a good conversation about it tonight. But yeah, I'm really honored to be here, and the folks in the room. I know I got some relatives in here too, and just glad some folks showed up. So it's a good deal.
Yeah, I was thinking about so Donnie and I met in I believe in person in March 2018 when the Arlee Warriors were about to win their second consecutive state championship, and what to my mind is the greatest sporting event, work of art, what do you want to call it, that I've ever witnessed, considering how they won and what they in the manner in which they did it. And then, so we had been talking a lot, and we've been talking a lot about recruitment in basketball at this point in time, and recruitment from the high school level to the college level. And one of the challenges of this story is that one of the many challenges from my mind is that it's reporting on young people and who are up against societal forces. But the time when when it comes to recruitment is happening toward the end of high school and the beginning of college. A time when, like in all of our lives, you're changing so fast. And so I was trying to understand why there's a lack of representation, especially on the men's side and college basketball programs, non-tribal institutions in Montana. And Donnie and I spoke a lot about this. And so, then the Warriors won their championship in truly stunning fashion, while dedicating their performance to their community and to people in throughout Montana who were struggling with mental health issues. And then it was so like overwhelmingly stunning and positive. And then sort of in real time, right, shortly after they won and after their videos went, that Jordan and Logan received such accolades, some of those forces, those centripetal forces with recruitment happened in real time. So I came out here, I think you said, like, you should come meet my dad.
Yeah, I think where you came into that, when I first met Abe, I was the rep for MHSA, and that was a tough position to hold because we were always trying to fight for a few things for our tribal nations a little bit more, and Abe come walking up on the bleachers. I was hosting that tournament, and we just go out there and hand the trophies off. So I always loved handing them to our tribal champions. And Abe came up and started visiting, and I'm always a little hesitant to talk to people anyways, but we got to, he really, you could see his heart was in a very good place, and so we started to talk a little bit more, and throughout a lot of that, and I did a lot of I still do suicide prevention work in our reservation communities. I've been doing that for almost 15, 16 years or more. So I knew that there was a lot of energy going on with those young men in the community, and he was pretty curious about the fact that maybe college recruitment wasn't happening as you felt it should around the team. And I think that's when I was saying, well, I think you got to meet my dad too. And so, because for those in Montana, you know the histories, and I think in his purity of seeing just this excitement and the talent level, and we have Native kids that will dominate anybody that gets recruited at a Division I level, and they do it consistently and rarely get recruited into those programs. So yeah, he came kind of asking about that, and I said, yeah, let's it's time you meet my father. So if you guys know my father, he was in for a hell of a ride.
Yeah, so I came up here, and it was that summer of 2018, and we visited and met with your dad, and you want to play a clip, or all right, we'll hear one of the things that we'll hear from what your father said at that time, summer 2018.
I think, as Donnie has pointed out to you, I think there's some bullshit happening, but it's been happening a long time.
That was the beginning of a long, winding conversation. But part of the project of the book was to try to examine that. And in many ways, it's examining the history of this place, Montana. And I think that one of the challenges is that an honest look at history where you're using the principles of journalism and the writers that I admire, I guess, reporting from multiple perspectives, corroborating, researching from the historical record. In this case, spending a lot of time with the ample and wonderful literature produced by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, the culture committees of the Salish Coast Bay Culture Committee, which is the place to learn more. But when looking at an honest look at history can be uncomfortable, and I think that no part of this book was comfortable in that way, and I've only become more comfortable at kind of leaning into that discomfort, if that makes sense. But so some of the things that we talked about were officiating, press coverage, and recruitment. There were other matters, but officiating is a matter that has been covered recently by 406 Sports. 406 MT Sports did a 3-part series covering bias in officiating recently, and curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I understand a lot of the complexities of referees and things like that, and I know that it's gotten worse with parents and everyone in the crowds nowadays. It's a very difficult profession, so I understand a lot of that. When I was on MHSA, we did the best to try to recruit, and I think voted up some increase in pay because you have such a small group traveling. I remember someone traveled from Laurel to Troy in a 2-day span because they didn't have anybody up north. And so I understand a lot of that stuff, but we were talking earlier today, and when there's 2 native teams playing, it's just such a beautiful thing, and it's high energy, high pressure. It's swift and quick and beautiful, and then when you have a native and a non-native team playing, there's a wall that comes up, and sometimes it seems like the calls start to shift, and it is different styles of ball, but those calls ain't made when 2 native teams are playing. And even if that other team, the non-native team, is a run and gun team as well, there's a lot more calls there. I mean, that's, I got friends that have tallied those foul systems over the last 20 years, And so Abe had a curiosity around a lot of that stuff. And, I grew up in Browning. My father was a coach. And so I remember going to all the games. My brother Sean and I were in the bus. I mean, I think since we could walk, we were in the gym and in the bus. And so I always knew those things everywhere we went. And so it's just kind of like, it's a tough situation, but it's obvious that sometimes it shifts in a different favor. And it can cause a disruption, because we've talked about that basketball court is sometimes the closest thing to an equal playing field for our Indian people. There's systems in place that aren't equal. And once you cross that line, that's where that fire kicks in and the warrior spirits kick in, and it can really create some amazing things, but it can also be a reflection of society, and you'll start to see that. You'll start to see that, and it'll go into the crowd, and you'll start to see frustrations that have been around for a long time. So it's kind of that.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I might just read a quick passage, if that's all right. This is when in the 2019 championship game, when the Warriors are seeking their third consecutive state championship, and they lose to a fantastic Manhattan Christian team, whom they've played repeatedly over recent years. I'll find it. It's the tie. I never wear ties. Okay, so for context, David Wetzel here is, at this point in time, is a former superintendent of Arlee schools and is the father of one of the stars of the team, Greg Wetzel. And Zanen Pitts, the head coach of the team at the time. Mark Beckman is at the time the director of the MHSA. Tim Polk is an official who made a call of a technical foul on Greg during the championship game, and Amy Bartles is the athletic director for Arlee schools, who has since moved to I'll just go from there. Following the championship, David Wetzel congratulated the boys and told them to focus on graduation. Privately, he was livid about the officiating. The final attempted free throw count was 40-7. The Eagles, he acknowledged, played a great game. Quote, "We just didn't get to play great with them." I suggested that the question he raised also hurt Manhattan Christian, who looked far hungrier and, after all, had already beaten Arlee during divisionals. But that's the curse of uneven playing fields. No matter how much you give, you never know how much you've earned. Wetzel was uninterested in that line of thought. Quote, "I think it does a disservice more to our boys." He added, "There were so many biases, implicit or institutional. I don't want to take away from Manhattan Christian," Zanen told me. "They beat us. I'm happy for them." Then I asked if it was fair to say, as I'd heard from multiple Arlee fans, that Jeff Belich, the coach of Manhattan Christian, had outcoached him. "You can't say that," he said, citing the foul shot disparity. Mark Beckman, the head of the MHSA, saw no problem with the officiating. He did not make Tim Polk available for an interview and noted that any school taking issue with the officiating could file a complaint. Arlee did not. In April, when I asked Amy Bartles, the athletic director, about the matter, she answered indirectly, quote, "MHSA is pretty well aware of what's going on. Everyone communicates a lot between the reffing pool, between the Montana officials coordinator. Everyone has a fairly good of understanding what goes on at those just because MHSA is present at the event. So, I don't know. That's a hard one." She said no one had made a formal complaint to her. A month later, she announced she was leaving Arlee for a position at the MHSA, working on social media and overseeing the training of officials. After taking the new role, she said of the championship, quote, "I do think overall it was a well-officiated game." She moved on. "Arlee," she said, "was a great stepping stone for me." So I wonder if you think that it might shift at all. The coverage recently in Forest 6 Sports brought attention from the Montana American Indian Caucus. And if you think that there, and I know that it's complex, right? So what do you see it shifting? How do you see it potentially shifting?
I think for it to be covered as much as it has been in the newspapers and things like that, I think that's something that's never Never happened very often. And that often, there was an incident when we were working there, and it's frustrating, but the media has the ability to shift a lot of that narrative into some things. But Montana's deep in it, so it's interesting. I hope it changes. I know there's recruitment of a lot of more Native American referees. Some of them don't get called up as they should, but there's a system in place that I always thought that they should have if there's a Native team, they should have a Native ref in each of those games. But what that causes, and I've talked with our Native refs, is they don't want to show favoritism. They don't want to be in this place. And sometimes it turns them into making a call they may not call because they don't want to, like they'll call a charge instead of an obvious block. So like there's so much to it. But I think once you get it out there and people start to talk about it, and those are great articles. It gets people thinking, and I think the problem I always had is there's folks in the crowd that aren't Native, and they can sit there and they can watch what's happening. And they got to be honest with themselves and say, hey, this ain't. It's always the Natives going against that. And if more people just kind of woke up and joined that force and said, yeah, this ain't right. They're kids, and our Indian kids, basketball is a big deal. And I was always frustrated that it was always an us versus them thing when I knew damn well those coaches knew what was up, those in the crowd knew what was up, and we need more people talking like that. So I think the newspapers sharing that type of a history and some of the folks that they're interviewing and having say some things, I think it's a big step.
What about recruitment? When I came here to visit you and your dad, Philip Molitor had signed to play at the University of Montana. He subsequently, despite having good grades, found out he wasn't eligible to do that. He has since found his own journey, which this year and last year resulted in being an All-American for Eastern Oregon University. Will Mesteth Jr. was the other senior of that year's team, and he had interest from Frontier Schools, which is the schools in the NAIA level schools, in many of them in Montana, and he hoped to play in Montana, and that interest seemed to go away toward the right after the season. He has also played great as a college athlete for Salish Kootenai College and for United Tribes Technical College. But when we were here, those opportunities were sort of vanishing in real time initially, and they have, as I say, have moved through, found their own path, and been quite inspiring, I think, in doing so. But do you see that changing, and how? And maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the complicated forces that are there.
Man, you put me on the spot here.
You can ask me.
Yeah. I think just over the years, and Abe and I talked about this a little bit, we really promote, my father and I created the Indian Athletic Hall of Fame, and, we run a Facebook page. We promote our youth more than I think they've ever been promoted. There's a lot of good energy, and it's when we were looking at a lot of that, my father was saying a little bit more that, geez, they just don't recognize many of those legends, even though everyone in the state knows them. Some of them may not get into MHSA Hall of Fame or various things like that. But I think just in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of our youth are moving on, and maybe it's an acceptance. I know Division I has really changed over the years, in my opinion. You did have Cola Bad Bear, shake things up and really make an impact at MSU. Now she's at MSUB where I played, so heck yeah, Cola. Go back to Eastern Montana College. So I mean, just even that right there, that's going to shift some stuff. You know, I believe in Famous Left Hand's another one. I do not know why he was not recruited. That kid got up at 5 a.m. for most of his junior, senior year and balled out. So the skill level is just so high in many of our players out there. I do see many going into the, Miles City and Dawson and in some of those schools. And United Tribes is good because you got Pete Conway Jr. sitting over there who played for the Bobcats. He tries his best to get our kids into places, and Famous was an All-American as well, I don't understand the draw that those players will bring into a stadium. I mean, you can't deny it. I think you're going to see it at MSU Billings this year. You're going to see a high level of attendance when they've had some struggles with that, but I just don't. I know that coaches are put in places that they got to win quick and they got to do it, but I don't understand why they don't just take a chance and bring a kid in.
I'm wondering too about when you talk about going from Bad Bear going from MSU, which is Division I, to MSU Billings. What is that? Because part of we talk a lot in the book about like expectations of what success is and trying to sort of invert some of those and question some of those, and like what does it mean to quote unquote make it as an athlete, especially after something like what the Arlee Warriors did in 2018. Like what is ever going to touch the level of meaning of that, so I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. That is, at a certain point, you said in the book, you say as in a quote, like, is high school the pinnacle of Native basketball? Like, and I'm curious how your thoughts around that have evolved, and because I think we're getting into questions of like, according to whose terms are you making it, or according to whose terms are you achieving?
All right. So what did you think when I said that?
Yeah, I mean, I would think my initial reaction was, but why? But then I thought, I don't know anything, so my general guiding philosophy for me as a reporter is to stick around long enough to let my opinion shift. So I wanted to hear it.
You're good at this. I think, working, there's so much pressure that comes on our communities. And like I said, I mean, everybody knows this. People have questions about basketball and why is it so big in Indian country? And that's a very long conversation. And I think that, my father, he was the first one to really break ground and trailblaze into the University of Montana. And he was so driven in it. He just had a tunnel vision. And he raised us boys like that. And then you realize, and I graduated out of Harlem. I went and moved around, but the joy and the excitement that you bring your people, Of course, I was always kind of yearning to be back in Blackfeet country, but it's no different when I was in Belknap. And you get to think about things because I went and played college basketball and then had my son, and I realized there's bigger things in life, And so I think there is so much pressure, and those kids are carrying so much. They're carrying legacies that maybe their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents all played ball of some sort, and it gets heavy, but they do it, and they get up and they do it. And, there's never another experience when you're winning in that kind of atmosphere. The feel, I would say it's like our old tribal victories, the warrior victories, where everybody is cheering, and I joke about it, but tournament time is the only time our reservations are often joined and happy and high-fiving, even if they're on the council and they don't like each other. It brings everyone together. And, I think in my personal experience when I went to basketball and played in college, so I was kind of coming from that. I think sometimes our youth, and I've I've often shared this with them. Enjoy the moment, man. Look around you and see what the hell you got, because it's very powerful, and there isn't very many moments like that in life, and that could be making it. I'll talk about that stuff a lot. What does success look like? That make your people happy, make them proud. They walk with their head held high, and I think there's nothing like that, and that's where I think Cola's going. She's heading back to her hometown, and you're gonna watch. There's gonna be an atmosphere, but that's kind of what I was leaning on.
And when you talk about the crowd all being there at State, and there's also like that unity, well, at least with Arlee, was reflected in the play. There's a game in the 2017-2018 season where I don't want to get the stats wrong, but Philip Molitaire scored something like 48 points in 3 quarters, or I don't know, just something absurd. But then there was tension on the team because he had scored so much, and he could sense it in some of the other players, and he talks about this in the book, and then he doesn't score as much after that. And then the statistical scoring is pretty even, but then the recruiting is not. And part of that is, coaches are under great deals of pressure, and the travel times might be great, but like to see the skill level, at least of the players who I was fortunate to cover, is not like entirely reflected in box scores. So anyway, that was something your dad talked about as well in 2018. Maybe we should hear that. Yeah, can we hear that other clip? Yeah.
But to get these kids, there's some damn good ones out there. And if you're really interested, it's like I said in the Missoulian, the road runs both ways into the res, right? I mean, it seems like we're always taking the way out, heading out for people. I think all these Montana coaches better realize, and I'll give you some examples, but maybe you got to get out to the reses. If they haven't already done it, you got to do it more. And it's like I told Donnie, you got to feel it. You got to feel that.
Yeah.
What goes on there in reservation life, even urban Indian life. But I think the road runs both ways.
Yeah.
Mic drop?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, did you want me to kind of just hit on some of that? Yeah.
What's it make you? Yeah.
I think I look at a lot of the things. We do this in my work, in education. There's such an authenticity in our tribal communities. I mean, it's very real, and I think he's hitting on that. It is weird when you leave. When I left Browning, it was really tough, and I didn't know what I was searching for, but I found it when I went back to Belknap, or I found it places when we'd go to Haskell, when you'd be around other natives and things like that. And as everybody sees, I'm light-skinned, but I never had any doubt that I was Blackfeet. I always knew that. So, you get some of these coaches, and I don't think it would be that difficult to get them out to the reservations to go to a ceremony or something, and something a little bit more deeper than a powwow. There's a lot of that revitalization happening, but I think when you get that understanding and that feel my old man's talking about there, it can change things. It doesn't just change like a coach. It'll just from up here, it'll change them here. And I think that's the biggest thing is we come from the heart in Indian country, and if you don't understand that, then, I mean, our native youth can read that on a person like nothing. They know if they're authentic or not, and I think that could be causing some of those problems too. So you're making me think a little bit. Could we do something for coaches? Maybe that's something we could do in the Hall of Fame. I don't know, but yeah, I think we do it with the youth. We bring native and non-native together, and once you get that taste, I mean, you felt it. You got into Arlee, you got into the Sailors Kootenai, you sit with those elders, changes you. What do you think? What do you think of that?
I mean, I wrote a book about it. I don't think you're wrong, though. I was going to read one. I don't know how we're doing on time. How are we? Okay. All right. I was going to read one more, that out of bounds passage maybe, and thinking about that. This is a passage from the book before that. The 2019 championship game I mentioned, and I'm meeting with Francis Brown Lone Bear, who's the assistant coach of the team, still currently an assistant coach at Arlee Schools, an amazing person, and Luke Lacey, who was at the time the bus driver. It's a tie. And I'm just, for identification, I'm just changing a couple words to. The next morning, Franny went for a coffee at an urban joint with brick walls and exposed ductwork. Wearing a salmon-colored hoodie and a ball cap bearing the image of a large firearm over the stars and stripes, Franny ordered a caramel latte. He was joined by Arlee's new bus driver, Luke Lacey, a devout Christian who wore the Warrior movement hat everywhere. So many Montanans have no idea what life is like, Lacey said. He'd grown up in the Bitterroot Valley. He nodded at Franny, his homeland. When Lacey was young, he said, he and his friends drove to Whitefish to ski, taking care to avoid stopping on the reservation. He didn't truly understand his home state, he said, until he went to post-apartheid South Africa to serve on a Christian mission. It took us going over there to see it here. These same dynamics were at play. I was just oblivious and unaware. I'm over there saying there's a big need for reconciliation right in my backyard. I just don't know if us white people are wanting to suppress how much blood is on our hands. The majority of white Montanans, they have no idea what we need to seek reconciliation and forgiveness for. Franny and Lacey started talking about the kids' college prospects. LJ had football interest but wanted to play basketball. Within Montana, neither he, Isaac Fisher, nor Greg Wetzel had any offers. Wherever they went, Franny said it wouldn't be easy. These kids can go anywhere and they're out of bounds. He was glad Phil was at North Idaho with Ty, Emmett Taylor III, and Zachary Camel Jr. He would be really out of bounds at the University of Montana. Franny said, for it to become easier, he said, something fundamental would have to change. In Franny's mind, the kids just had to do what made them happy. His mind turned back to tonight, another title game. Franny sipped his latte. I'm proud of him, he said. He paused. It took all season to say that. Really, I'm proud of him. And so I was thinking about that phrase, out of bounds, and like what all of that conveys, you know, and how to, and some of the shifts that might be happening in places, in so-called out-of-bound places. How do you see that? How do you see those shifts happening? Maybe, I mean, you talk about some of the work you do with youth and building connection, and because a lot of these, the other thing to say is complicated, and like the guys I was writing about are friends with their rival teams, and they have, you know, we don't live in silos. Everyone's connected, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that out of bounds statement, it is a culture shock when you leave And I'll try to always have people, it's interesting how he had to go out to see this, and then he comes back home and realizes it's right there. So I'll talk about that in certain ways with folks who are ready to listen. But like you imagine, just for folks here, you know, our youth or our Native people go into another community or another world. So it's no different than you going into their world. It's like you walking into Browning, Montana during a ceremony or during an event, and you're the only white person there, and everyone's brown. And it's no different when they come into that university system, you know. And you're just kind of looking around. And I was weird because I really understood my privilege. I'll tell you that. I really understood it. And I think it's helped me in life, but I think that culture shock, and we talked about it. My father said that, you know, when he was coaching at the Grizz as freshman, there was a African-American ball player that Judd Heathcote, who was the head coach at that time, had my dad take care of, take him places, make sure he was always taken care of. And my dad said, hey, if they did that for our Native youth, there could be something a little bit different. But it is tough to step out of that. And the culture shock, it's pretty steep.
What else you got? We're getting there. I don't know.
Yeah, I just want you to like your writing style in there was very observant and objective, and like, I mean, I that's what I really appreciated that. And I think like that's what I would think your book, and I've read pretty much most of the native basketball books. I think how did you keep things so objectively and just not bring your opinion in, and how did you respect what was happening so well?
Yeah, we might need a little more time, but that's a large question. I think that, like, you know, there are principles to use in reporting, reporting from multiple perspectives, interrogating your own assumptions. Before I published the book, there's reporting on statistics about recruitment, for example, among other things. And somebody, an investigative reporter I trust, was like, you should just report against yourself as aggressively as you can. Just go at yourself. So I did that. And those are some things that you can do. But there's no, one of the challenges, one of the interesting things about journalism is there isn't like there are principles and there are rules we adhere to, but there's no like playbook for every instance. There's just, especially, it's a little different with when you're reporting on government and public officials, where the rules and principle, what your job is a bit more specific and codified. But especially in an instance like this, reporting on young people, a lot of it was just trying to rely on the wisdom of people who I sought counsel from, many in the community. And just doing what I felt was kind of just trying to keep steady and do what I thought was right. And I tried a version of the book without myself in it. I wrote many drafts of the book throughout a lot of them. It took a long time. And but there was sometimes if you read articles, there'll be no narrator there, and that can create. It's a technique is that it's used often in long, you know, what is sometimes called long-form journalism or magazine-length journalism, and it invisibilizes the person and the narrator, the writer. And I tried a version like that, and it felt, partly because it was safer. It felt safer to do that, and it was ultimately failed, and it was less honest, I think. Partly because, and there were a few reasons why I didn't do that. So I had. one was that the article that I wrote for the New York Times Magazine did have an effect on what was on the route of this team. I'm not sure it's not for me to say what that was, but but there was an effect. For two, to use the omniscient narrator, the invisibilized narrator can create in the eyes of some readers a sense of absolute truth or absolute knowledge, which I don't have. I have zero knowledge. There's basically nothing. And so I was trying to be a little bit more honest about that and just trying to acknowledge places where my understanding hit limits. So I was focused more on that. I was focused more on being as honest as possible while being respectful. That was my sort of a guiding thought. And then the other matter is that there are a number of places where people who are in positions of authority and have knowledge are sharing things with me and are talking to me, and I was going to include all of their words without paraphrasing or characterizing them, and to do that without two people in a room. To make it one person in a room would not have been, just would have been, the mechanics of that are kind of weird. Maybe I'll read one of those passages. This is before the season starts. Before the 2018, the remarkable 2018 season, the first games start at the beginning of practices.
Martha, I know your time's probably clicking away, but we always go over that. Never any limits. Just go as it goes.
I'm visiting here with Alan Pierre, who's Will's grandfather, Will Messeth Jr.'s grandfather, and Alan's late father, Patlik Pierre, an elder of the tribe. Alan's voice took on a marching cadence and the room fell silent. Just play to the best of your ability. And I said, don't forget you're part of that team and it's a team effort. That's why I'm kind of always on him. And he's like, geez, Grandpa, every time I come over here. I said that because that's the way it's got to be. You can't expect things if you're not going to work hard for it. Alan went on about Will's grades, his powwow dancing, his love for the mountain, his grades. I've always told him that, his sports are, they're good, but I need him to get an education because for Native people, it's a little bit different when you get out in the mainstream and try to live life. I thought about that phrasing, I need him, and all it conveyed. Alan continued, it's a little bit different, and there's more challenges that you run up against. Our children know where they come from and who they are, so it's not only my grandson that I think about when I talk about that way of things. It's almost every Native American that gets put up against something like that. There's just so much that ain't working for them. The food was ready, along with a fresh pot of Folgers. All of them bowed their heads, and Patlik and Alan prayed together a Catholic prayer in Salish. Patlik had been an evangelical minister for decades before realizing, in his words, I'm not that, I'm this. He had retired twice before after working in the forestry industry and then working for the tribes. No more retirement, he said later. They say, how come you don't want to retire? I say, that's for old people. He liked basketball just fine. Will, he said, was pretty strong in his Indian ways, and he uses that on the basketball court, and he's a top man in his field. But Patlik wanted to discuss larger issues. It's always been us against them or them against us, one way or the other, and so a lot of this reflects deeply on young people. As they're growing up, they're learning that they're different than other people, and because of that, they feel inferior to the dominant society. He clearly didn't think the dominant society was much to be envied, but kids didn't always get that. They feel inferior, and so because of that, that's why the suicidal tendencies come. And what can I do to change? What can I do to be more like them or more outgoing? Stuff like that. They can't find a way, so they become depressed. I asked if the conflict between indigenous America and the America begat by my ancestors was inevitable, if it was naive to hope for a more harmonious and just future. I'm hopeful for it, he said, but I don't think it's going to happen. There's always going to be that thing there. He had a word for that thing. Quote, it's called greed. Greed. When all the forests, all the oil's out of the ground, all the minerals are taken, and there's no more to take. These people that have exploited the earth, they're going to find they can't eat their money. Going to have taken and taken and taken, have given nothing back, and they're going to find out that there's no more. And that's coming. I predict that to be coming. His eyes bored into me. What's going to happen is, out there, when the earth becomes desolate, they're going to come and knock at our door. Can I have some of what you've got here? How did you keep the place so beautiful? Why is it beautiful when all the rest of it's desolate? He answered, because we know how to be.
With that, I'm going to have to call it. But there's going to be time for cookies and conversation and getting a book signed if you want right out in the gallery. So please thank our speakers and join us for some refreshments.